In this lesson, we will add a few more shape layers and change their blending modes. Okay, so we're back here where we were in the last lesson, and I just want to move back over to the main composition. So I'll go ahead and click that tab there. And now what I want to do is add a few more circles to my composition. So I want to make sure that whenever I begin to add these circles, I don't have any layer selected, because as we learned in the last lesson, if I begin to add a circle with a different layer selected, it's going to draw a mask. So that tool is used as both the masking tool and as the shape tool. So keep that in mind. If you're not going to add a shape layer first, you need to make sure that you don't have any layers selected. So I'm just going to click down here beneath all of my layers there in my stacking order so that none of them are highlighted. And then with that ellipse tool selected, I'm just going to begin to draw another circle. Now, again, I want this to be a perfect circle, so I'm going to hold Shift as I drag that. And I also want the circle to be drawn from the middle instead of the corner. And I really always like to draw my shapes from the center of that layer and then move the layer itself. So what I'm going to do is hold the space bar, and that's going to allow me to move the entire shape anywhere on that shape layer. And then I can let go of the space bar and then begin to change the size again. So I want this shape layer to be just about right there in size. So you can see about how much room it has there on the outside edges. And now I'm going to come up here and grab my selection tool just so that I can move that shape kind of up here to the upper left-hand corner. Now I want to add one more shape just the same, but instead of going through all of those steps again, I'm just simply going to delete the shape, or actually duplicate the shape that we've already created. So go ahead and select that shape layer, and to duplicate it, you're just going to hold down Control and hit D, and that's going to duplicate it there on the timeline and automatically select the layer that is on top. So that's going to be shape layer number 2. So I can just click and drag this over to this other spot here right next to that circle. Now the next thing I want to do is make this one just a little bit bigger, so I have some variation and contrast in all the sizes of these circles. So the first thing that I would usually try to do would be simply to scale this shape up. So I would hold Shift to make sure that it was constrained proportionally, then drag this so that it would be scaled up. So actually you're going to want to click that first and then hold Shift. So that's going to give me this circle, and I'm making it just a little bit larger. So one of the problems that I see automatically is that the stroke on the outside of this circle still says that it's 10 pixels, but it's clearly larger than this circle that's stroke also says it is 10 pixels as well. So what's happening is that scale function is scaling up everything as well as the stroke. So that is not what I want to do. I want the stroke to be the same for all of the shapes and really just have the shape itself be a little bit bigger. So the way that I can change that is by selecting that shape, and then we'll go into this shape layer's contents. So go ahead and twirl down through those. Then we're going to twirl down the ellipse one and the ellipse path. And now we see that we get this property for its size. So size is going to be different from the scale. So if I drag this up, you'll notice that the stroke is staying the same width, and the only thing that's changing is the size of that circle. So that's exactly what I'm wanting to change, and that looks great. That's a good contrast between these shapes. Now maybe make it just a little bit smaller so that it's not competing with the size of the main circle that we had created. Maybe we could even go in and make this one a little bit smaller just to add more contrast. So we can come into the ellipse and ellipse path options and turn the size down of that first one that we made. So now we have a lot of contrast between all these shapes that we've created here. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit when you're trying to edit with those shape tools, and just figuring out how to drill down through all of those options can be a little bit tricky. Okay, so now what I want to do is change the colors of these layers. So I'm just going to refer to my swatches. And this is actually behind my background layer, so I need to drag this up to the top of that stacking order. So now I can see my layer, and we just want to make sure that we keep that at the very top so that we don't get confused based on where this swatches layer is. Okay, so go ahead and grab that shape layer number 2, and I'm going to give this one a little bit of a reddish tint like what we have here for our red swatch. So to change that, I'm just going to click this fill color there and color pick the red, and then I'll change the stroke color by doing the same thing and then just making it a little bit darker. So we'll just move down from that area there. And now we'll do the first one, kind of this yellow color we see there. So change the fill by color picking that yellow fill, and the stroke by doing the same thing, and then we'll just make it a little bit darker. Okay, so now I'm going to turn back off that swatches layer just so that I can see what I'm working with. And I want to add a few keyframes to animate these circles in. So let's go ahead and probably right about here on the 7-second mark, I want these to be introduced. So one thing that I could do is just go ahead and animate their positions in as they are. But I also sometimes like to move layers forward in my timeline so that they begin about where I'm going to set that first keyframe. And this just helps me to stay a little bit more organized and know, okay, I'm seeing these layers appearing at this point. If I don't have them twirled down where I can see their keyframes, I'm able to just look at the timeline and see that those layers begin at that point in time, and that's probably the layers that I'm looking for if something's not quite right with my animation. So that is just a personal thing. You don't have to do that with your layers, but I find it to be helpful. So we'll go ahead and select both of those layers and hit the P key to bring up the position property. And I'm going to go ahead and hit the position stopwatch, and you'll notice that because I had both of those layers selected and I hit the stopwatch for them at the same time, it put a keyframe on both of those layers at the same point where my current time indicator was sitting. So that's something to keep in mind that's helpful if you want to set a keyframe for multiple layers at the same time. Now, again, this is the point that I want those layers to end up. So I set the keyframe once I was happy with their positioning. So I'm going to go ahead and just drag those keys forward. And now at this first keyframe, I'm going to go ahead and move those circles off. So we'll start with the red one. And this time I don't want it to happen in such a linear way as what we've been doing before. I kind of want it to come down from the upper right. So I'm just going to drag it in that general direction. And you'll notice that it automatically set a key for that on that layer. And then I'll do the same thing for the yellow layer. Okay, so now let's scrub this animation and see what it looks like. And this animation is happening over about 1 second, so it's about 24 frames that we're allowing for these to come in. So if later we re-preview this and we feel like it's happening too slowly, we can always go in and edit that if they need to. So now I'm ready to change the blending modes. And what a blending mode is, basically, it's going to blend those colors together differently than if I was just maybe changing the opacity or something like that. So right now I can completely see that these layers are totally opaque. And so the way to change that is to bring up my blending mode column. So earlier we talked about how to bring up different columns. I'm simply going to come over here to where my columns are, right click, go to column, and then I'm going to move down here to modes. So go ahead and click modes. And that's going to bring up the mode and also the track map. But for now, I'm only going to be worried about the mode itself. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this down. And right now it says normal. I'm going to choose multiply. And we see automatically what happened is that this layer became blended with the background and with our teal solid. So that makes for a much more interesting composition that the overlap point is giving us this new color. Now I want to do the same thing for the red, and I'm actually going to end up choosing multiply for this one as well. But let's say I didn't know that I wanted to use multiply. A quick way for me to simply cycle through all those different blending modes that you saw is to hold shift and hit the plus key. So you notice that as I'm changing that plus key, it is giving me all these different blending modes. So I've moved down there so that I can read multiply, and that's the one that I'm going to be using. So now we have a really interesting composition being created with all of these different colors interacting with each other. And we could even change our circle number band and just see what that looks like if we like the way that the multiply mode looks with that. And it's a little bit more interesting letting that blend with the background, so we can leave that for now. If we want to come back and change it later, it's really easy to edit that simply by changing that mode there in the modes column. So in this lesson, we learned how to change the blending mode of a layer depending on the look that we're going for.